we have agreed between the two of us that we shall talk briefly about the mandate we have been given. In other words, the contours of our discussion on this forum, which is going to discuss Israeli-Africa relations, particularly from the point of departure of parliamentarians who are here, and yourselves, who obviously have knowledge of, affinity to, appreciation of parliament in the democratization process. So to begin with, we shall have a very open-ended discussion, unless Gabriel thinks otherwise, because he's the boss. So before the two of us speak, I will request Gabriel to say one or two words why he thought this forum was necessary and what he thinks we should do here. Then I'll ask my colleague, Honorable Dr. Fenyo Butale, to speak briefly, and then I will say one or two words, matters arising from what they have said, and we shall open the floor for discussion. In the end, we need to come out with a product. What is it that we are proposing as a way by which the Harry S. Truman Institute can continue with this dialogue or be partner in this dialogue on Israel-Africa relations, especially with regard to parliamentarians, and the topic we are all concerned with, the advancement of democracy and democratization in Africa. So keeping those in mind, let me request the Reverend Dr. Gabriel.
Excuse me, just put this one,
Yes,
so everybody can hear, okay?
Yeah, thank you. You will be allowed to do that in the fullness of time.
Thank you, thank you.
Here, maybe.
As it is said in the Bible.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, good.
Well, first of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank each one of you for coming to attend this conference. I think we have had a very good discussion yesterday and today. And this parliamentary forum, the way we set it, we would like to hear from the politicians, members of parliament who are here today. And we want to hear your views in connection with Africa-Israel relations. And what we would like is to request you, after your deliberations, to see if you can come up with just one page of what I would call it, your resolution or what you have decided to put together that we can give to the Institute, Truman Institute to have, to show that the African members of parliament, they have a soft spot for Israel, or they have something they feel that they would like to share as you represent your individual countries or African parliament, but the whole goal is to develop a strong bond between Africa and Israel. And that is what we are trying to provide here. Thank you. I will hand this over to the chairman and the co-chair.
Okay, Honorable Fenyo Butale.
I don't know, this thing is so close to me. Okay, better now. Thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Chair. I think we have had very illuminating discussions yesterday and this morning. And, you know, yesterday in the corridors, I just had a quick chat with the chair, and we agreed that in this whole equation, in our pursuit for a holistic approach in terms of Israeli-Africa relations, the missing link, as we saw it before today's discussion, was the political parties. We felt that the political parties, as vessels of people's aspirations, we are in the business of selling people dreams, and when they buy into your dream, then they give you the chance to implement the dream. And in this instance, we are here now to discuss about the Parliamentary Forum as a conduit through which we can ensure that we strengthen the Israeli-Africa relations. And it's good that we have members of parliament in this room who will, I think, cherish this opportunity to discuss this topic. In Africa, when you look at our parliaments, I said yesterday, discussing my own parliament, I think members of parliament will look at their own situations and enlighten the meeting. There are, several ways you can describe a parliament. There's not wanting to go too much into academics, but there's a parliament that is independent, truly independent. In the true sense of the separation of powers, you have a parliament that is independent of the executive and of the judiciary as it was conceptualized in the separation of powers. But I am yet to hear, and I think colleagues are here, they could help us understand whether they know of any parliament in Africa that is truly independent. And therefore, that can be said to be a true voice of the people. Because when you look at the separation of powers, because members of parliament are the ones that are elected by the people, they are supposed to be the custodians of the people's aspirations, as I put it. So if parliament is subdued to the executive or even to the judiciary, then the voices of the people are in that way subdued. So from where I'm standing, African parliaments have this problem of independence. As a result of this, you do not have, parliaments are not adequately resourced. Because we are in an institute, we need to talk about this because we're in my parliament. I do my own research as a member of parliament. I do my own research. If I wanted to come up with a private member's bill, it's a hassle because I have to get my own drafters at my own expense. That weakens the quality that comes out of parliament. When you look at budgets, for example, we have argued in the past that we need our own budget office as parliament, so that we can crunch those figures for ourselves and critique whatever is brought by the executive. But that is not the case because our parliaments are just, we just have to consume what comes because we don't have the capacity to truly engage. I'm raising these issues because these are areas, potential areas of collaboration, as I see it, with Israel, where Israel, in terms of capacity building, could assist in terms of ensuring that democracies or the process of democratization in Africa truly takes off. Because if parliaments are strong and this institution called parliament is strengthened and members of parliament are capacitated, then I believe we would have we would have taken a couple of steps forward. So not to preempt the discussion, but I think after we listen to the debates, we will then also come up with proposals on how we think the discourse can be taken forward. So let me take it back to the co-chair to crystallize the rough ideas that I've given. It's good to have a senior next to you because you can say all the rough ideas and their job is to crystallize.
Thank you. I think Daktari, as we say in Swahili,
really hit the nail on the head. I have very little to add, except to say that these comparative experiences that we have within Africa and comparative experiences that we share with Israel, which by the way has only been independent for the last 70 years, maybe as long as India has been independent, and just longer than Ghana by 10 years. So I think in terms of achievement of institutionalizing democracy and sustaining democracy, there must be some comparative experiences that we may learn from between us and Israel. And I think the discourse this last few days has raised certain questions, certain concerns that I think could be concretized by focusing on Israel-Africa relations, so that there can be some enlightenment, let me use that word, notorious word from 19th century Europe. There could be some enlightenment that we can get from one another's experiences. So this session was really meant to bring the issues home. One, to the home country where the Truman Institute is based, an institute that was founded on the basis of Truman's role in establishing the status Israel, and therefore the values of peace, democracy, and coexistence of nations as enshrined in the UN Charter was as germane to the founding of Israel as it was to the founding of African states after colonization. So the growth of both the state and democratic institutions, I think, is something that we could get some comparative lesson from, and some rich discourse on, and therefore perhaps shape possible future discourse. So with those few remarks, and when politicians say those few remarks, they are actually few. So I'd like to open the floor to everybody to contribute. It's a very open debate, open-ended. Thank you. Anybody? Sir?
Yeah, starting is always difficult, but once you start, everybody will want to speak. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to start.
You don't want to start?
No.
That false start in us. Okay. Anybody else?
You know for sure in Parliament we have our senior colleagues. So in as much as we are here as politicians, we expect our elder brothers to start so that we can kick off from there.
I see you talking and looking at Akena.
It's called protocol.
Yes,
thank you.
learn.
By dint of his grey hair,
Yeah.
you should now start Akena.
Even in Africa we have bigger nations, greater nations. So
This grey is purely false. It came prematurely.
Unexpected.
Expected it was, but not at the time when it came.
There's more to come.
It's overpowering. I think this is one of the topics which is far-reaching as far as the whole nature of discussions which we've been having over the last 2 days. Personally, I feel that there's a lot which we can draw upon and build within this context. I am particularly interested and passionate about Paul's presentation, because this one touches on a key aspect which was brought about, that you cannot have security with empty stomachs. And across Africa, we are all under this stress, as I raised earlier, the vulnerabilities which we have faced in East Africa with this climate change has really put us into a position to realize that there is a serious problem which is knocking at the door. So I would love to see that this parliamentary forum bringing together African-Israeli relations can deepen our understanding and ability to tackle some of these problems. Also, basing on the presentations we had today, the question of education and communication. How do we communicate lessons learned, good practices, whether it is in democracy, whether it's in agriculture, or how do we get the benefits of forming institutions which are going to be durable and which are going to be able to enhance the quality of life of the citizens who we represent. Because I think all our role in politics is really to try and improve the lives of our citizens. How best can we use the shared experience, the knowledge which others may have achieved to work within our context and help the dream of having this Africa which works. And another point which came out this morning, the dream of others will call it, we'll talk about the United States of Africa, independent republics of Africa, whichever way around it, we have to think beyond our countries to address many of the problems which we are currently facing, which we are undergoing. We have to be able to get the greater cooperation cutting across borders. But the key thing is, how do we translate the good practices, good opportunities to improve the lives of citizens? I think the challenges which the Right Honourable Leader of Opposition of Botswana has raised affects all our parliaments. By the time I joined the Uganda Parliament, there were 4 researchers for a house of over, at that time it was I think 300 and something members. But we had 4 researchers for the whole parliament. Whatever you send to research, it just comes back something which you cannot use, it's not in depth, so you have to do your own research or employ somebody to help you with that research based on the time issue. But that one I see is more our problems. How do we sort out the functionings of our parliaments to improve on our output? Last year when I came, we tried to raise some of this issue of levels of cooperation within parties or parties across parties with like-minded policies. Although over the last 1 year, the ideological party, the left of center, the center-right is almost becoming meaningless with every election. I think America took the cup. Donald Trump was on the left, hopped onto the right. I think nobody knows exactly where he is now. In France, we had the institutional parties literally collapsing in the presidential election. And across board in Africa, it is not as clear, it's not as distinct. So it is also something we have to grapple with. If we are to cooperate with parties, I don't know which party I'll be partnering with, because I have a long history with my elder here, a similar political background. How do we foster greater cooperation across political lines with political parties and building upon lessons which have been learned? It is not sensible with the time and the pressures which we are on to try and reinvent the wheel. If something is working and can work, it is easier to get the best practices and utilize them to the best of our abilities. I think, Mr. Chairman, I would like to stop at this point, and maybe I think others may have more to add on to that.
I think that statement that Aken has made last is perhaps the most important. If something is working and can work, why do you look for another thing? The fact that there is a recession of political parties in Europe and the US at the moment doesn't mean that that's a permanent condition of history. It may be transitional. So we cannot write off the role of political parties in democratization or in parliamentary system of government just because of the conjunctural factors we are seeing in global politics today. They may change. So we are perhaps better off still focusing on political parties until such time that history will have proven us wrong. But remember what Chairman Mao once told Edgar Snow. Edgar Snow was interviewing Chairman Mao after the Chinese Revolution, sometimes in the 1950s. I think Edgar Snow reported somewhere. And Edgar asked him, Chairman Mao, what do you think the impact of the French Revolution was on the Chinese Revolution? And Mao said, it is still too early to tell. So maybe it's still too early to tell what this conjuncture thing. Yes, my brother.
Thank you. I think what I'm honestly here, the Parliamentary Forum on Israel-Africa Relations. To begin with, I think one thing that we might first need to do, probably as individual countries, legislators, or from a broader African perspective, find out where did we come from. Historically, back in the 40s, like my country, Liberia, one of the countries in Africa, that cast a vote for Israel at the United Nations to become a state of our own in 1948. We maintained that relationship, and I think it was much like a symbiotic relationship in which the both nations shared and benefited. It continued until, I think, about 1973, when most of Africa, some, I should say, out of pressure, some out of their own principles for which they stood, decided to sever relationship with Israel. Of course, that in itself affected the individual countries as well as Israel in one way or the other. Back in 1983, Liberia, my country, restored diplomatic relations with Israel. But between 83 to where we find ourselves, the relationship is very loose. Why? That is something that we might need to investigate. Of late, I recall my President pro tempore was here in Israel. He met with some of the Israeli officials and they had some discussion. And before I left home, I learned from the foreign ministry that, in fact, the Israeli Prime Minister would like to be visiting Liberia. But generally, what I want to say here is God, in creation, in my view, made this world with a sense of what Martin Luther King described as a sense of interrelatedness. We are all tied one to another. We need each other. And if, in my view, as we intend as African brothers and sisters, as you mentioned, decide to restore or renew our relationship with the state of Israel, I will hope that Israel, too, as a nation, be willing to embrace Africa in a way of a change of technology. And one way, one aspect with which I think we could begin is education. Education is very key. And Israel has that strength, that capacity. And maybe not to imitate what China is doing, but I think Israel can even modify on what China is doing and even do it better in a real relationship that will benefit both Africa and Israel as a nation. By providing opportunities that young Liberians or young Africans can come and learn Israeli culture through their educational system and learn technology that they will take back to Africa and help to develop their own country. Israelis can also leave from here and go to Africa and learn of our own culture. That, in that way, in my mind, would be bringing the both people of Africa as well as Israel together in a relationship where we'll be bounded by our respective culture, and that can enhance a better working relationship that will be sustainable. Thank you.
Very good. I think those are very important points we may note. I've just noted there is certain questions we will raise. Yes, Bishop. Bishop. You are hereby promoted.
I'm just inquiring, Mr. Chairman, whether there is such a relationship between Israel and Africa, or we are on courtship so as to win Israel to become our direct.
Yeah, I think the Bishop.
I think I can give a little bit on that. Thank you very much for your question. We all know that after 1948, Israel gained independence. And after that, the first Prime Minister of Israel had a real interest in Africa because he wanted to link up with Africa. And we know that when Ghana became the first independent country in the continent of Africa, Israel reached out to Ghana. And then Israel moved country after country in the region. Uganda became independent in 1962. Israel moved into Uganda. And they moved into countries, different countries in Africa, to try to help them build a strong relationship. We have the airports in Uganda, airfields in Uganda built by Israeli, the apartments, the flats. We have the agricultural research in Ghana that was set by Israeli. We have all programs across Tanzania, Zambia, and other places. Then comes 1973 and we have the war. And what happens? Africa decided to kick Israel out of Africa. And that relationship ended. And over the years, things have changed that Africa needs Israel and Israel needs Africa. And the foundation here is how do you link back to that relationship that was destroyed. As we speak today, we have probably 16 Israeli embassies out there, and we have African diplomats here close to 10 or 14 or 16 also, who are residents here now. The relationship is getting better, and I think this is the opportunity for you to build this relationship and continue watering the flowers. Thank you.
Let me put it this way, as social scientist, Gabriel has talked like an ambassador. But we could put the issues, I think, in terms of broader questions that broaden the problematic. The first thing, because the question that was asked there was, where do we come from? I would say the following. The first question we need to ask ourselves, what in the past strained Israeli-Africa relations? What in the past strained Israeli-Africa relations? Have the conditions behind the straining of these relations remain static or change over time? I think social scientists always begin by asking broad questions which are researchable, not conclusive like Gabriel is putting it. I mean, yes, it's right from the point of view of an Israeli. Yes, I'm coming to you. So, have the conditions behind straining these relations remain static or change over time? Another question that we could ask from Gabriel's presentation and from Nicodemus Okila's question, to what extent, I think this is very important, to what extent are the dynamics of Middle East politics and international relations a factor in shaping Africa-Israeli relations? I think these are the variables that I think we need to look at if we are going to be open-ended in getting down to a discourse. Because what we want is a discourse.
We don't want to speak ex cathedra like the Pope. Yes, my sister over there. Next to that. Yeah. I think she wanted to speak, or did you, the master, did you want to speak?
I would like to add that after the OAU in '73 decided that all African countries should cut off diplomatic relations with Israel, even our friends in Africa, like Kenya, like other countries, they did not want to break the solidarity of the Africans, and they cut off diplomatic relations with us, even Kenya, that was very good friend of Israel, but some of the countries agreed that the Israelis can be as interest officer.
Yeah.
So I was, for example, interest officers in Kenya during the time when we haven't got the diplomatic relation officially, but we could do everything we wanted in Kenya. And we have also experts there during when we haven't got diplomatic relations. So this is what I want to say. But at 82, Congo was the first one to renew diplomatic relations with Israel, and after her, other African countries, one after the other, renewed diplomatic relations with Israel, although the OAU did not cancel the decision. So now we have got diplomatic relations with 40 African countries in Africa. The problem is that the bilateral relations are good. That's to say, we have about 11 embassies now we have got in Africa. But what it is not good is the multilateral. That's to say, in the OAU, now it is Africa Union, in the United Nations, Africans are still voting against Israel, and this is not accepted by Israel. So later on, they explained to us that they need the Arab help financially, but they also want the cooperation with Israel in agriculture and in other fields. So now the situation is that the bilateral relation with Africa, they are good. And we have 16 embassies, African embassies in Israel. And Israel has got only 12 because of financial situation, but we have consulates and we have good relation with them, but still we are asking African countries not to vote against Israel in Africa Union and the United Nations. And I think this is now the main aim of Israel, and this is why the Prime Minister Netanyahu went to 4 countries in Africa, and he got some promises that also in the Africa Union there will be some of the African countries that maybe abstain or will not be there in the voting. And there is some improvement in that there are some Africans that even at Africa Union they are not there, Africans, or they are abstained. So this is now the situation, and what Israel wants these days is to have both in the multilateral and in the bilateral to have good relations with the Africans, and we hope this is now the aim of Israel when she works in Africa, and we hope that pole pole Dio mundo, and it will be coming eventually.
Okay, I think that's a very good Our question is, Ambassador, to what extent is this information available in African Parliament, so that when we're debating the foreign relations of our countries, we can debate them from the point of information for both our own government and Israel. I think our concern has come like this. Fact-based knowledge
In other words, we should know what is it that led African countries to make certain decisions in 1982. What circumstances have changed in Middle East politics to make individual African countries make alternative decisions? I will tell you from our own experience in Kenya is that the membership of Egypt in COMESA has had a very positive impact on the relationship between the COMESA members and Israel. Because if Egypt can have relations with Israel, why not the other COMESA countries?
Yes.
You see what I mean? So the dynamics of Middle East politics in Africa, as well as globally, has a lot of impact on Israeli-African relations, and it is those dynamics that we need to study and know what they are, so as to make a statement about how to improve Israeli-African relations, or what factors impede the improvement of those relations. So for us, we are doing it from the point of view of advancing knowledge, not necessarily taking sides. Okay, yes, that's my point of view anyway, but we can go ahead. Ambassador, you have not more to say? Nataka kuongeza kitu bwana.
Ambassador Vital, can you contribute something to say? Please.
Well, Ambassador Ariel spoke already, so I think he covered the issue.
Sorry, we cannot hear very well. I'm sorry, we cannot hear.
Can you get closer, maybe?
Here at the end of the table, it's very difficult to hear.
In my humble experience, we had the state of Israel for many years. We offered substantial development aid almost to all the countries in Africa in different fields. We do remember the beginning of those relations when late Prime Minister Golda Meir, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, she visited the first time in African country, Ghana. And following that visit, I think it was a model. It was a model for later on for many other Africans, because Mashab, the Department for International Cooperation and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they were able, we had budget at that time, we were able to send people. That means we shared physically our relations and our knowledge with our African brothers. In return, Israel was a very young country. We did not have all the problems which we have now, because before 1956 there was no intifada, no uprising, no Palestinian terror. So life was different in Israel, so we could focus improving and strengthening our relations with Africa, because we consider Africa is the closest neighbor, because we have a direct, I would say, it's a direct homeland, from Israel to Africa. We can cross Egypt and we can arrive to Africa. So it makes some intimate relations with Africa. That's how we consider it all the time, without any political considerations. I don't think at that time, because the EU did not exist at that time. So there was no political pressure, I would say, upon the African authorities, governments, neither to sever ties with Israel or to establish diplomatic relations with Israel, because Israel was conceived as a miracle in terms of development. So we were a model to follow for many, many countries. The Israeli agriculture, the Israeli scientific research, water development, the medical development, etc., etc. So we were, I would say, a honest broker to offer assistance, humanitarian assistance, to our brothers in Africa. And that's what happened, as a matter of fact. Unfortunately, the 1967 war was a turning point in our relation with Africa, because for the first time, as a result of this war, Israel has bigger maybe 3-4 times more than it used to be. And then the OAU decided that, because I think it's one of the items in the agenda of the OAU, the non-violation of an African territory to any country. I remember when I was a young diplomat in many African countries, that was one, I would say, the most important principle in politics, not to violate the no violation of the borders of an African territory and African. I remember that because the borders, I remember when we used to travel, for example, between Ghana and Togo, I remember families were cut to two, because the colonial definition of the borders was did not take any consideration, neither to families, neither to tribes, etc. So you can find the same in Niger, between Niger and Nigeria, the people will speak the same languages. If you go to Kinshasa, so they speak almost, the Lingala is spoken everywhere. But if you go to the east, they speak Swahili, they don't speak Lingala. But I think one new component became, I would say, an important in the politics of Africa. I think the relations between Parliament and between the executive power was not always very strong, because there was sometimes in different countries, I would say, a genuine stress in such way that we have seen in many African countries different coups, for example. So within, following the coup d'etat, for example, so the regime was changed, and then the politics was changed. Now, Arieh Oded said, Dr. Arieh Oded, my colleague, Ambassador Arieh Oded, I was ambassador in Congo Zaire, not Congo Brazzaville. I was ambassador for many years, 7.5 years I was there. So I can measure in the aftermath of the coup d'etat how Mobutu was expelled, and then Kabila came again. And the Israel, we had very good relations, with the parliament and with the Senate. We had an outstanding relation. I think Israel was a superpower in terms of political values, in terms of political standing. Israel was much stronger, for example, than France and Belgium. Israel is a tiny country. Belgium is still, even today, until the departure of Mobutu, Zaire, Belgium was considered as a superpower, because you know the history of Congo. Congo used to belong as a private property to Leopold II.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when most countries, African countries, severed ties as a result of the OAU decision, because there was an Arab pressure over this organization to cut diplomacy, to sever ties with Israel, for the simple reason, because we violated one of the principles of the OAU, because we conquered an African territory, not the black African territory. It's Egypt. It's an Arab territory, but Egypt make it like we violate an African territory. And this is the result. Mobutu decided to change, I would say, the course, because he needed, to stabilize his regime. So he signed with, he was the first one in 1982, to restore diplomatic relations with Israel as a result of extending our bilateral relations, in many spheres. I think this phenomenon, I was also ambassador in Senegal. And Senegal is a Muslim country. So there is a big question, how come that a Muslim country is establishing relations with the State of Israel? It's really a serious question. I remember in all my meetings with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, he used to tell me, you know what, the Arab countries are putting pressure that we have to sever ties with you. But establishing the relations with Senegal, it shows our determination to be sovereign in our decision. So with this, I'm concluding. Excuse me if I was a little bit too long.
But interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
David, did you want to say something? I saw your hand up. David, was your hand just stretching? Okay, yeah.
Just actually, hi everyone. Thank you. Just from an outside, Truman Institute perspective, and hearing these wonderful discussions and wonderful idea, I would like to propose my own view about how, going back to Reverend Odima's question, how to advance the relations between Israel and Africa. And for me, as a research institute, it's not about politics. It's not even about economy. First is about understanding, and we should understand and learn about each other. And its meaning, and for me, actually, it should never be